John Steinbeck's The Pearl, Chapter 5, page 84. I will protect you, said Juan Tomas, and he called, Apollonia, close up the door. Do not even whisper that Kino is here. They sat silently all day in the darkness of the house, and they could hear the neighbors speaking of them through the walls of the house. They could watch their neighbors raking in the ashes to find the bones. Crouching in the house of Juan Tomas, they heard the shock go into their neighbors' minds at the news of the broken boat. Juan Tomas went out among the neighbors to divert their suspicions, and he gave them theories and ideas of what had happened to Kino and to Juana and to the baby. To one he said, I think they have gone south along the coast to escape the evil that was on them. And to another, Kino would never leave the sea. Perhaps he found another boat. And he said, Apollonia is ill with grief. And in that day the wind rose up to beat the gulf and tore the kelps and weeds that lined the shore. And the wind cried through the brush houses, and no boat was safe on the water. Then Juan Tomas told among the neighbors, Kino is gone. If he went to the sea, he is drowned by now. And after each trip among the neighbors, Juan Tomas came back with something borrowed. He brought a little woven straw bag of red beans and a gourd full of rice. He borrowed a cup of dried peppers and a block of salt. And he brought in a working knife, 18 inches long and heavy as a small axe, a tool and a weapon. And when Kino saw this knife, his eyes lighted up, and he fondled the blade with his thumb tested the edge. So Juan Tomas, first of all, he lies for him. He gets provisions for their trip. So that's kind of blowing up that theory a little bit. But then the ability to lie is something, too. And why does Steinbeck always say his last name? He doesn't say Kino Tomas. Or is that like those twin or those names like Mary Sue or Becky Lynn or whatever? The wind screamed over the gulf and turned the water white, and the mangroves plunged like frightened cattle, and a fine sandy dust arose from the land and hung in a stifling cloud over the sea. The wind drove off the clouds and skimmed the sky clean and drifted the sand of the country like snow. Then Juan Tomas, when the evening approached, talked along with his brother. Where will you go? To the north, said Kino. I have heard that there are cities in the north. Avoid the shore, said Juan Tomas. They are making a party to search the shore. The men in the city will look for you. Do you still have the pearl? I have it, said Kino, and I will keep it. I might have given it as a gift, but now it is my misfortune and my life, and I will keep it. His eyes were hard and cruel and bitter. Coyotitu whimpered, and Juana muttered little magics over him to make him silent. The wind is good, said Juan Tomas. There will be no tracks. They left quietly in the dark before the moon had risen. The family stood formally in the house of Juan Tomas. Juana carried Coyotito on her back, covered and held in by her head shawl, and the baby slept, cheek turned sideways against her shoulder. The head shawl covered the baby, and one end of it came across Juana's nose to protect her from the evil night air. Juan Tomas embraced his brother with the double embrace and kissed him on both cheeks. Go with God, he said, and it was like a death. You will not give up the pearl? This pearl has become my soul, said Kino. If I give it up, I shall lose my soul. Go thou also with God. So Juan asked him one last time, are you sure you want to take the pearl? That's a little something. And, don't go by the shore. They're going to search the shore. The wind blew fierce and strong, and it pelted them with bits of sticks, sand, and little rocks. Juan and Kino gathered their clothing tighter about them and covered their noses and went out into the world. The sky was brushed clean by the wind, and the stars were cold in a black sky. The two walked carefully, and they avoided the center of town, where some sleeper in a doorway might see them pass. For the town closed itself in against the night, and anyone who moved about it in the darkness would be noticeable. Kino threaded his way around the edge of the city and turned north by the stars, and found the rutted sandy road that led them through the brushy country toward Laredo, where the miraculous Virgin has her station. So we were trying to look that up first period. There's a lot of Spanish Catholic statuary and old churches built by the Spanish in Mexico. And so a lot of times a Catholic church will have a statue that goes with their saints. So when they say virgin like that, they're talking about the Virgin Mary. And there's some sort of statue or something there. We looked, but we didn't really exactly find exactly that. But we found a nice hotel picture thing that's in the chat, if you want to look at it. Kino could feel the blown sand against his ankles, and he was glad, for he knew there would be no tracks. The little light from the stars made out for him the narrow road through a brushy country, and Kino could hear the pad of Juana's feet behind him. He went quickly and quietly, and Juana trotted behind him to keep up. Some ancient think stirred in Kino. Through his fear of dark and the devils that haunt the night, there came a rush of exhilaration. Some animal thing was moving in him, so that he was cautious and wary and dangerous. Some ancient thing, out of the past of his people, was alive in him. The wind was at his back, and the stars guided him. The wind cried and whisked in the brush, and the family went on monotonously, hour after hour. They passed no one and saw no one. At last, to their right, the waning moon arose, and when it came up, the wind died down, and the land was still. Now they could see the little road ahead of them, deep cut with sand-drifted wheel tracks. With the wind gone, there would be footprints, but they were a good distance from the town, and perhaps the tracks might not be noticed. Kino walked carefully in the wheel rut, and Juana followed in his path. One big cart going to town in the morning could wipe out every trace of their passage. All night they walked and never changed their pace. Once Coyotito awakened, and Juana shifted him to in front of her and soothed him until he went to sleep again, and the evils of the night were about them. The coyotes cried and laughed in the brush, and the owls screeched and hissed over their heads. And once some larger animal lumbered away, crackling the undergrowth as it went, and Kino gripped the handle of his big working knife and took a sense of protection from it. The music of the Pearl was triumphant in Kino's head, and the quiet melody of the family underlay it, and they wove themselves into a soft padding of sandaled feet in the dusk. All night they walked, and in the first dawn Kino searched the roadside for a covert to lie in during the day. He found his place near to the road, a little clearing where deer might have lain, and it was curtained thickly with dry, brittle trees that lined the road. And when Juana had seated herself and had settled to nurse the baby, Kino went back to the road. He broke a branch and carefully swept the footprints where they had turned from the roadway. And then in the first light, he heard the creak of a wagon, and he crouched beside the road and watched a heavy two-wheeled cart go by, drawn by slouching oxen. And when it had passed out of sight, he went back to the roadway and looked at the rut and found that the footprints were gone. And again he swept out his traces and went back to Juana. She gave him the soft corn cakes Apolloni had packed for them, and after a while she slept a little. But Kino sat on the ground and stared at the earth in front of him. He watched the ants moving, a little column of them near to his foot, and he put his foot in their path. Then the column climbed over his instep and continued on its way. And Kino left his foot there and watched them move over it. The sun arose hotly. They were not near the Gulf now, and the air was dry and hot, so that the brush creaked with heat, and a good resinous smell came from it. And when Juana awakened when the sun was high, Kino told her things she knew already. "Beware of that kind of tree there," he said, pointing. "Do not touch it, for if you do, and then touch your eyes, it will blind you. And beware of the tree that bleeds. See that one over there? For if you break it, the red blood will flow from it, and it is evil luck." And she nodded and smiled a little at him, for she knew these things. "Will they follow us?" she asked. "Do you think they will try to find us?" "They will," said Kino. "Whoever finds us will take the pearl." "Oh, they will try." And Juana said, "Perhaps the dealers were right and the pearl has no value. Perhaps this has all been an illusion." Kino reached into his clothes and brought out the pearl. He let the sun play on it until it burned in his eyes. "No," he said, "they would not have tried to steal it if it had been valueless." Yeah, we were just talking. This thing is probably multiple millions of dollars. So, and then that would be tens of millions of pesos. Yeah, would they try to kill somebody? night after night after night if it was valueless? Do you know who attacked you? Was it the dealers? I do not know, he said. I didn't see them. He looked into his pearl to find his vision. When we sell it at last, I will have a rifle, he said, and he looked into the shining surface for his rifle. But he saw only a huddled, dark body on the ground, with shining blood dripping from its throat. Here's more of that light versus dark in Steinbeck's work. So, I'm going to have a shiny new rifle. And then when he looks for the vision, all he sees is a body on the ground with shining blood dripping from its throat. And then he said quickly, we will be married in a great church, light. And in the pearl he saw Juana with her beaten face crawling home through the night. Dark. Our son must learn to read. Light, he said frantically. And there in the pearl, Kayotitu's face, thick and feverish from the medicine. And Kino thrust the pearl back into his clothing, and the music of the pearl had become sinister in his ears, and it was interwoven with the music of evil. The hot sun beat on the earth, so that Kino and Juana moved into the lacy shade of the brush, and small gray birds scampered on the ground in the shade. So you need to know that Mexico is a desert, and water is going to be a massive issue on a trip like this. In the heat of the day, Kino relaxed and covered his face with his hat and wrapped his blanket about his face to keep the flies off, and he slept. But Juana did not sleep. She sat quiet as a stone, and her face was quiet. Her mouth was still swollen where Kino had struck her, and big flies buzzed around the cut on her chin, but she sat as still as a sentinel. And when Kayotitu awakened, she placed him on the ground in front of her and watched him wave his arms and kick his feet, and he smiled and gurgled at her until she smiled too. She picked up a little twig from the ground and tickled him, and she gave him water from the gourd she carried in her bundle. Kino stirred in a dream as he cried out in a guttural voice, and his hand moved in symbolic fighting. And then he moaned and sat up suddenly, his eyes wide and his nostrils flaring. He listened and heard only the cricking heat and the hiss of distance. What is it? Juana asked. Hush, he said. You were dreaming, perhaps. But he was restless, and when she gave him a corn cake from her store, he paused in his chewing to listen. He was uneasy and nervous. He glanced over his shoulder. He lifted the big knife and felt its edge. When Kayotito gurgled on the ground, Kino said, Keep him quiet. What's the matter? Juana asked. I don't know. He listened again, an animal light in his eyes. He stood up then, silently, and crouched low. He threaded his way through the brush toward the road, but he did not step into the road. He crept into the cover of a thorny tree and peered out along the way he had come, and then he saw them moving along. His body stiffened, and he drew down his head and peeked out from under a fallen branch. In the distance, he could see 3 figures, 2 on foot and 1 on horseback. But he knew what they were, and a chill of fear went through him. Even in the distance, he could see the 2 on foot moving slowly along, bent low to the ground. Here, one would pause and look at the earth, while the other joined him. They were the trackers. They could follow the trail of a bighorn sheep in the Stone Mountains. They were as sensitive as hounds. Here, he and Juana might have stepped out of the wheel rut, and these people from the inland, these hunters, could follow, could read a broken straw or a little tumbled pile of dust. Behind them, on a horse, was a dark man, his nose covered with a blanket, and across his saddle, a rifle gleamed in the sun. So if you don't know, when you're my great-grandpa Buckshot and Grandpa Smokey, they were father and son. A couple times we went hunting, they would like literally pick up poop and squish it and smell it, and they would go like, you can see from this poop pile, this is really fresh, see how smushy it is, or oh, this one's from like last week, it's really hard and doesn't smell very good. Like he thought the fresh stuff smelled good. That's how turbo they were. And then from the poop pile, he'd go like, look all the way around 360 and go, he went that way. And sure enough, we'd go where he pointed, and like couple hundred yards later, there'd be another poop pile, and it would smell exactly like the other one. So you knew you were on the same animal. Kino lay as rigid as the tree limb. He barely breathed, and his eyes went to the place where he had swept out the track. Even the sweeping might be a message to the trackers. He knew these inland hunters. In a country where there is little game, they managed to live because of their ability to hunt. And they were hunting him. They scuttled over the ground like animals and found a sign and crouched over it while the horsemen waited. The trackers whined a little, like excited dogs on a warming trail. Kino slowly drew his big knife to his hand and made it ready. He knew what he must do. If the trackers found the swept place, he must leap for the horseman, kill him quickly, and take the rifle. That was his only chance in the world. And as the three drew nearer on the road, Kino dug little pits with his sandaled toes so that he could leap without warning, so that his feet would not slip. He had only a little vision under the fallen limb. Now Juana, back in her hidden place, heard the pad of the horse's hoofs, and Coyotito gurgled. She took him up quickly and put him under her shawl, gave him her breast, and he was silent. Whew!